The human stood before the alien princess, and everything changed. The human envoy had traveled far, leaving behind the blue-green skies of Earth, the faint hum of cities, and the familiar smell of rain. He was alone now, in the heart of a civilization older than any human could imagine. The palace sprawled before him like a living monument, each towering spire carved with alien symbols that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. He had heard stories of the Viorlians, warriors who conquered worlds with their claws, rulers who judged entire species with cold logic, and a princess who had never shown mercy. Yet here he was, a representative of humanity, the weakest, youngest species in the galactic coalition, expected to speak as an equal. As Elias stepped through the gates, he could hear the whispers. The Viorlian court was a living sea of colors and shapes he had never seen before. Some beings had wings, some had scales, some glowed with an inner light, and others had multiple limbs moving in precise, synchronized patterns. All eyes, sharp and calculating, followed his every step. The courtiers had expected a human to bend, to tremble, to show fear. Humanity had always been underestimated, but Elias had been trained for this. He had learned that humans survived not because they were strong, but because they endured. They adapted. They chose courage, even when it terrified them. He was led down the central hall, a tunnel of polished crystal that amplified every sound. His own footsteps echoed like drumbeats. Every so often, a Viorlian would glance at him and snicker, clearly entertained by the tiny, frail creature who dared to walk among giants. Elias kept his eyes forward, his mind steady. He would not show weakness. That was his weapon. The human strength had always been invisible to those who judged by muscle or scale or raw energy. It was persistence. It was creativity. It was the stubborn refusal to give up, even when the odds were insurmountable. At the end of the hall, a massive chamber opened before him, the throne room. He could see her then, Princess Celira. She sat atop a raised platform, her posture perfect, her eyes like polished obsidian, sharp and unyielding. Even the sunlight seemed to bend around her, creating a faint halo that made her seem untouchable. Courtiers bowed and kneeled around her, but she did not acknowledge them. Her gaze was fixed on him. Elias had expected hostility, perhaps even laughter, but what he saw instead was curiosity. "Step forward, human," a voice boomed through the chamber. It was calm, commanding, and it made his chest tighten. This was not a voice that needed to shout. It demanded obedience simply by existing. Elias moved forward. He did not kneel. He did not bow. He walked with measured steps, his head high. He could feel every whisper in the room, the tension that rose like a wave against him. For the first time, some Viorlians gasped. A human had never stood before the princess without showing submission. Some doubted whether it was arrogance. Some doubted whether it was foolishness. But Elias knew it was neither. It was respect, human respect, which was earned through courage, not fear. Princess Celira's eyes narrowed slightly, and Elias caught a flicker of interest. She had met countless envoys before, and most had crumbled under her gaze. But he did not flinch. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady. "Your Highness," he said, "I come in peace, representing the people of Earth." The princess tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Peace?" she asked. Her voice was a melody of authority and curiosity, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the room and settle into his bones. "Your species is fragile, short-lived, and insignificant. Why should I believe that you can offer peace?" Elias did not hesitate. He met her gaze. "Because peace is what humans choose, even when the odds are against them. We endure because we must, not because we are strong. We survive because we learn, we adapt, and we refuse to give up." A murmur ran through the court. Some scoffed. Some tilted their heads, as though trying to understand a concept alien to them. The Viorlians valued power, strength, and fear. They did not understand endurance as a weapon. They did not understand that a small, fragile species could influence the fate of empires simply by refusing to surrender to despair. Princess Salira leaned forward slightly, studying him. "And yet here you are," she said, "standing before me, unarmed, unshielded, unbowed. Do you not fear what might happen to you?" Elias shook his head. "Fear is not the absence of courage, Your Highness. It is the choice to act despite it. Humans face the universe knowing we are weak, but we face it anyway. That is why we survive." There was a long pause. The princess's eyes softened just for a moment, and Elias sensed it. He had expected scorn. He had expected a test of some kind. But the princess was thinking, and that in itself was rare. Few could capture her attention for more than a heartbeat. He had it for longer. Then, as if to challenge him, she spoke again. "You will be tested, human. You will face trials that will break the bones and spirits of your kind. Do you still stand so confidently?" Elias' lips curved slightly. "Yes, Your Highness, because humanity does not break, we bend. We adapt, we endure." A ripple went through the court. The Virelians who had come to witness his humiliation now watched in silence. There was a growing realization that this human was different. Not stronger, not faster, not taller, but unshakable. He was like a rock in a storm, fragile on the outside but impossible to destroy by force. Princess Salira rose from her throne, her presence commanding the room. "So be it," she declared. "You will face the trial of worth. If you fail, humanity's standing in the coalition will end. If you succeed, perhaps you will teach me something about this species I have long dismissed." Elias nodded. "I accept the trial, Your Highness." He was led to a vast chamber where the trials would take place. The first was physical, a gravity chamber designed to crush weaker species under intense pressure. Humans were not built to endure such force. Muscles ached, bones groaned, and breathing became a labor. Yet Elias moved with precision, using his knowledge of human anatomy to resist injury. He fell many times, but he rose each time, refusing to surrender. In the chamber, he remembered the words of his father, a man who had survived wars and disasters on Earth. "Strength is not what you have in your hands. It is what you refuse to give up, even when everything is against you." Those words carried him through the pain, through the fear, and when he emerged, bruised but unbroken, the princess observed him quietly. She had not expected him to endure. The next trial was mental. He faced the tribunal of truth, a device designed to detect lies, fear, and hesitation. Every word, every thought would be analyzed. Many envoys had failed here, revealing secrets that led to their species' disgrace. Elias knew the truth about humanity. They were weak, fragile, mortal. But they were also resourceful, inventive, and compassionate in ways the galaxy often ignored. He spoke openly, admitting flaws and limitations, but also emphasizing their resilience and courage. Again, whispers ran through the court. Virelians could not understand such honesty as a form of strength. To them, admitting weakness was a weakness itself. Yet Elias' calm, unwavering voice made them pause. He did not shrink from the spotlight. He did not apologize for his species. He stood, and in standing, commanded respect. Finally, he faced the war simulation. Against elite commanders, he would be tested in strategy and adaptability. Humans were slow to learn compared to the rapid reflexes of Virelians. They had no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, no centuries of combat training. Yet Elias approached the challenge differently. He studied his opponents, observed patterns, and anticipated moves. He lost battles, yes, but he adapted after each loss. He improvised, he retreated when necessary, he used resources creatively. By the end of the day, he had not won in the traditional sense, but he had survived and outthought many who had assumed he was hopeless. The princess watched silently. Elias had proven something the court could not ignore. Humans were not strong in the ways they expected, but they were formidable in ways they did not understand. That night, as the palace slept, the princess returned to her private chamber. She looked at the stars outside her window and thought of the human who had stood before her, unbowed and unbroken. There was a strange feeling stirring inside her, a recognition that perhaps the galaxy had misjudged humanity all along. Perhaps this fragile, resilient species had a kind of power the Virelians had never considered. Elias, too, reflected on the day's trials. He was exhausted, every muscle aching, yet he felt a spark of hope. He had not bowed, he had not surrendered. And in doing so, he had done more than survive. He had begun to shift the perception of his entire species. For the first time, he realized that survival was not enough. Humans had the potential to change the galaxy, not through force, but through endurance, courage, and the refusal to accept limitations. And standing before the alien princess, he sensed that something fundamental had already changed. The next day would bring new trials, new challenges, and perhaps new revelations. But Elias was ready. Humanity had always faced the impossible, and humans had always endured. This was no different. And in the shadows of the Virelian palace, something shifted. A princess who had ruled through fear and respect now found herself wondering what it truly meant to be strong. And it all began with a single human who refused to kneel. The morning sun had barely risen over the spires of the Virelian palace when Elias Ward was summoned again. The first day had tested his body, his mind, and his courage. He had endured pain, exposure, and scrutiny unlike anything he had ever known. Yet the human envoy remained standing, and the princess's curiosity had grown into something heavier, something resembling thought. Today, the trials were different. They would test not only his endurance but his intelligence, strategy, and ability to inspire others. He entered a vast chamber, unlike the gravity chamber or the tribunal. The walls were lined with holographic displays, each projecting alien worlds, battles, and complex tactical simulations. This was the war hall, where Virelians trained their greatest commanders in the art of interstellar warfare. Elias paused at the entrance. The sheer scale of the hall was overwhelming. Ships moved across simulated star systems, armies clashed on distant planets, and enemy fleets maneuvered with terrifying precision. Every holographic battle had been carefully constructed to reflect impossible odds. He knew that no human had ever survived such a test, yet he also knew that human survival rarely relied on overwhelming strength. It relied on creativity, adaptation, and trust. A Virelian officer stepped forward, his multiple limbs folding into a precise, intimidating pose. "You will command a fleet," he said. "Your objective, defeat the enemy using the resources given. Failure is fatal in our simulations. Begin." Elias took a deep breath. The simulation began immediately. Dozens of ships moved at incredible speed, enemies launching coordinated attacks from every direction. The human fleet was smaller, slower, and fragile. Loss was inevitable if he approached it like a traditional Virelian commander. He remembered the words of his mother, a scientist who had taught him to always look for patterns. When you cannot match strength, find a way around it. Adapt, learn, and survive. Elias started to maneuver his ships differently. Instead of engaging the enemy head-on, he divided his fleet into small, flexible groups, using speed and unpredictability to avoid destruction. When one unit was threatened, another moved to provide cover. When an enemy exploited a weakness, he adapted his strategy in real time. He did not fight with brute force. He fought with thought, observation, and endurance. Hours passed. The holographic enemies advanced relentlessly, and humans in the real world would have collapsed long before this. Elias' hands ached from constant control, his mind strained to track countless variables. Yet he remained focused, analyzing, predicting, and adjusting. He lost many ships, yes, but the fleet survived far longer than any previous human attempt. From the balcony above, Princess Celira observed silently. At first, she had expected him to crumble, to make mistakes that revealed his weakness. Instead, he endured. His methods were strange to her, alien even, but they were effective. She leaned forward, fascinated. Humans had never impressed her. They were fragile, foolish, and predictable. Yet this human was none of those things. As the simulation concluded, the enemy fleet finally overwhelmed some of his units. Elias sighed, knowing he had not won by Virelian standards. Yet when the results were displayed, the princess studied them carefully. He had survived longer than any other human, adapted more quickly than some Virelian trainees, and shown remarkable foresight. For the first time, she allowed a small hint of respect to cross her expression. "You did not win," she said, her voice calm yet edged with curiosity. "Yet you survived longer than I expected. Why should this matter?" Elias met her gaze steadily. "Because survival is not always about victory, Your Highness. Sometimes it is about learning, adapting, and enduring. Humans are not the strongest, but we do not give up. That alone can turn the tide of events that others deem impossible." A murmur ran through the court. Some courtiers were outraged at the idea that a human could claim such wisdom. Others whispered in astonishment. The princess, however, remained silent, lost in thought. The next trial came without warning. Elias was led to a different chamber, this one darker, colder, and filled with strange devices. It was the chamber of illusions, where fear was magnified and control was tested. His task was simple in words: navigate the maze and reach the end. In practice, it was far from simple. Shadows shifted unpredictably. Voices whispered doubts and threats. He saw visions of failure, of destruction, of his home world burned to ash. Each step tested not only his mind but his emotions. Humans were vulnerable to fear, yet Elias knew the power of perseverance. He focused on one thought: he could not fail. Not for himself, not for humanity, not for the people who had sent him here to represent them. One step at a time, he moved forward, ignoring the illusions and whispers. When the shadows tried to overwhelm him, he reminded himself of what humans had endured on Earth: famine, war, disease, disaster. They had always survived, and they would survive here too. Hours felt like days, and exhaustion threatened to overtake him. Yet at the end of the maze, he emerged with nothing but his determination intact. The princess observed from above, her interest now fully captured. This human did not rely on strength, skill, or power. He relied on something deeper, something ancient: persistence. When Elias returned to the main hall, the princess addressed him directly. "You have survived trials meant to break you. You have faced fear, pain, and impossible odds, and yet you continue. Tell me, human, why do you not falter?" Elias paused, considering his words carefully. "Because humans endure. We face the impossible because we must, not because it is easy. Strength is not always in force. Sometimes it is in refusing to surrender when the universe expects you to." The court was silent. This was not the answer they had been taught to respect. Power was measured in destruction, in conquest, in fear. Yet here was a human, alive and unbroken, speaking of endurance as if it were a weapon. The princess's expression softened, just enough for Elias to notice. He saw in her eyes something he had not expected: doubt. She had long believed in strength as the ultimate measure of worth. Now she wondered if she had been wrong. The final trial of the day was perhaps the most unusual. Elias was asked to lead a council of alien species, each with their own agendas, prejudices, and desires. Their goal was to plan a strategy for a simulated interstellar conflict. In the past, Virelians had always failed at this. Pride and arrogance made it impossible for them to work together. Elias approached it differently. He listened. He observed. He encouraged compromise and creativity. When conflicts arose, he mediated, finding solutions that satisfied everyone without betraying anyone. The aliens were skeptical at first, their eyes flicking with doubt and impatience. Yet slowly, they began to cooperate. Plans emerged that no single species could have conceived alone. By the end of the session, the council had achieved a result that amazed even the princess. Not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most ancient had produced such a plan. A human had done it, and he had done it without force, without fear, and without pride. Princess Celira descended from her platform, moving closer to Elias than protocol allowed. You speak of endurance, of cooperation, of survival through wisdom rather than strength. I do not fully understand it yet, but I see that your kind, fragile as it may be, holds power in ways I have never imagined. Elias bowed slightly, a gesture of respect rather than submission. Perhaps, Your Highness, humans are not strong in the way your empire defines strength. But we survive, we endure, and sometimes we inspire. That is our strength. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she nodded. Tomorrow, the trials will continue, but for now you have proven something remarkable. Perhaps humanity is not what I expected. Perhaps there is more to your species than the galaxy has seen. Elias felt a quiet satisfaction, but he did not celebrate. He knew the trials were far from over. Each step had been challenging, but greater challenges awaited. Yet he also understood something fundamental. The princess's curiosity was growing, and that curiosity could be more dangerous than any weapon. That night, as he rested in a modest chamber within the palace, Elias reflected on what had happened. The court had expected him to fail. The princess had expected to dismiss him. And yet he had survived, adapted, and influenced events without firing a single weapon or demonstrating physical dominance. He thought of humanity on Earth, enduring wars, disasters, and struggles, always finding a way to rise again. He realized that this was why humans persisted, not because they were strongest, not because they were fastest, but because they refused to accept defeat. And somewhere deep in the palace, the princess stared at the stars, thinking of the human who had changed her understanding of strength. She had always believed that power came from dominance. Now she wondered if power might also come from endurance, from courage, from the stubborn refusal to bow even when the universe demanded it. Elias slept that night knowing one thing clearly. The trials were far from over, but humanity had already begun to prove its worth. And the alien princess, the heir to one of the oldest empires in the galaxy, had begun to see them in a new light. A human, weak by every conventional standard, had endured. And in doing so, had made the first step toward changing the way the galaxy saw his species forever. The peace of the Viorlian Empire was shattered before the sun had even risen over the northern spires. Alarms rang across the palace, echoing in the halls with a sound that made Elias Ward's heart pound in his chest. The simulation he had mastered, the trials he had endured, suddenly seemed trivial. A real threat had arrived, one that could destroy everything the princess had built, and everything humanity had fought to survive. Princess Celira moved with a speed and decisiveness that startled even her own guards. She had seen threats before, but nothing like this. Reports poured in, fleets disappearing without a trace, entire colonies wiped from the maps, and strange, unmoving machines advancing across star systems. The attackers were known as the Arachnians, an ancient race of machines thought long destroyed. They did not negotiate. They did not fear. They did not tire. Their power was absolute and their purpose unknown. Elias watched from the command balcony, the familiar calm of a human strategist settling over him despite the fear gnawing at his stomach. Humans had never been the strongest, but they had always survived the impossible. And now survival was not just a hope, it was a necessity for the entire galaxy. The princess turned to him, her eyes sharp, almost desperate. The Viorlian fleets are failing. Our strategies, our leaders, they are not enough. You claimed humans could endure where others fall. Show me, human. Can you save what we cannot? Elias nodded. I can try, Your Highness, but we must do things differently. We cannot fight like the Viorlians. We need flexibility, unpredictability, and cooperation between species. Strength alone will not win this war. Celira hesitated, pride and fear battling within her. Then she nodded, a rare gesture of trust. Do it. You have control. Elias took a deep breath. This was no simulation. There were no reset buttons. Every decision would have consequences. He quickly assessed the situation. The Arachnians advanced in rigid formations, predictable in their patterns but overwhelming in numbers. The Virelian fleets responded with traditional tactics, attacking head-on and dying by the thousands. Elias knew what had to be done. He would divide the fleet into smaller units, use human ships, flexibility, and coordinate a multi-species defense that relied on cunning and cooperation instead of raw power. As the fleets moved, Elias sent out instructions. Humans modified weapons mid-battle, shifting from energy blasts to concentrated shields, while alien allies adjusted formations in ways they had never tried before. Communication was chaotic at first, languages and signals clashing, but Elias remained patient, guiding them with calm, precise instructions. When one ship was surrounded, another would create a diversion. When an enemy pattern emerged, the humans would exploit it, luring the machines into traps. The first clash was brutal. Ships burned, explosions ripped through the void, and hundreds of lives were lost in seconds. Elias gritted his teeth, refusing to panic. Every human crew knew that survival depended on thinking, reacting, and adapting faster than the machines. And they did. They learned from their mistakes, recovered, and attacked again with new strategies. Princess Celira observed from the main palace viewport, her pride and fear warping into something unfamiliar. Awe. The humans were not stronger, but they were smarter in ways the Virelians had ignored. They did not charge blindly. They did not seek glory. They survived, adapted, and inspired those around them to do the same. Hours turned into days, and the battle raged across multiple star systems. Entire fleets were destroyed, yet humanity and their allies continued to regroup, recover, and fight back. The Arachnians were relentless, yet they could not anticipate the ingenuity of humans. Ships that should have been destroyed moved with unexpected agility. Alien commanders who had doubted humans began to rely on their strategies. The impossible was happening. A human-led coalition was turning the tide against a machine species thought unbeatable. One critical moment came when a massive Arachnian warship emerged from hyperspace, directly above a human colony. It fired, obliterating defenses in seconds. Panic swept through the fleet, but Elias remained calm. He calculated trajectories, predicted enemy movements, and coordinated a counterattack using diversionary tactics and synchronized strikes from multiple species. Human pilots risked their lives, flying directly into the warship's line of fire to draw its attention while others attacked from unexpected angles. The plan worked. The warship was disabled, not by strength, but by adaptability and cooperation. The colony survived, and the Virelian High Command finally understood what Elias had been teaching all along. Humans could endure, adapt, and overcome, even when the universe seemed determined to destroy them. In the middle of the chaos, Princess Celira approached the human envoy personally. She had walked through the command center, past the burning wrecks of her pride, to see the human who had dared to defy her expectations. "I do not understand it," she admitted, her voice low but firm. "Your species is weak, fragile, but you fight like no other. You endure when all should break. How do you do it?" Elias did not hesitate. "Because we must, Your Highness. We survive because we choose to, not because it is easy. We do not fight to dominate. We fight to endure, to protect, to inspire. That is our strength." The princess studied him in silence. She had spent centuries relying on strength and fear to control her empire. Now she realized there was another kind of power, one she had never considered: courage, adaptability, and the refusal to surrender. The battle continued, more intense than ever. Entire sectors fell under Arachnean attack, but humans and their allies held firm. Small, flexible units carried out precision strikes. Scouts relayed intelligence in real time. Medical crews adapted treatments to save lives faster than traditional methods. Every human action was deliberate, thoughtful, and unexpected. The machines could not anticipate them because humans did not follow predictable rules. During one critical engagement, Elias personally coordinated a rescue operation. A transport carrying hundreds of civilians was trapped under Arachnean fire. The Virelian commanders wanted to abandon it, but Elias refused. "We do not leave our people behind," he said simply. He directed small human ships to create a shield while alien units distracted the enemy. It was dangerous, almost suicidal, yet it worked. Civilians were rescued, lives were saved, and the Virelians began to realize that humans valued others above themselves, a concept almost foreign to their empire. By the fourth day, the Arachneans began to falter. Their rigid formations were broken. Their predictable patterns exploited. The human-led coalition had forced the ancient machines into retreat. It was not a complete victory, but it was enough. Enough to survive. Enough to change the perception of humans across the galaxy. Princess Celira walked among the surviving fleets, her gaze following Elias as he coordinated repairs, supplies, and morale. She had never seen leadership like this. Humans did not rule through fear. They did not command through intimidation. They inspired through action, by risking themselves for others, by refusing to give up. She realized that strength could take many forms, and human endurance was one of the most formidable she had ever witnessed. That evening, after the battle had ended and the fleets began to regroup, the princess finally spoke privately with Elias. "Your people, they are unlike anything I have seen. Fragile, yes, but dangerous in ways that strength alone cannot measure. You fought not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival and for others. That is remarkable." Elias shook his head slightly. "We fight because we have to, Your Highness. We endure because giving up is not an option. The universe may be bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than us, but that does not matter. We find a way always." Celira looked at him, a rare softness in her expression. "You have changed my understanding of power. Not by defeating me, not by conquering, but simply by standing firm, thinking, and refusing to yield. The galaxy has underestimated humans for too long." Elias felt a quiet satisfaction, but no pride. He knew the trials were far from over. There would always be new threats, new challenges. Yet this battle had proven something vital. Humanity's true strength was not in muscle or weaponry, but in courage, adaptability, and the refusal to give up. The next morning, reports came in from across the galaxy. Word of humanity's endurance, ingenuity, and bravery spread quickly. Other species began to see humans differently, not as weak laborers or diplomats, but as a force capable of surviving, adapting, and inspiring allies in the face of impossible odds. Princess Celira stood atop her throne once more, her thoughts lingering on Elia's ward. She realized that humans, in their simplicity, had revealed a truth her empire had never accepted. Survival was not measured by strength alone. Courage, resilience, and the ability to endure the impossible were perhaps the greatest weapons of all. And as Elias prepared for the next trial, the human envoy understood one thing clearly. Humanity had survived once again, not because they were the strongest, but because they refused to surrender. And in the eyes of the alien princess, humanity was no longer the weak species the galaxy had assumed. They were something far more formidable. The war was not over and the trials would continue, but one truth had already been established. A human had stood against the impossible, had led, and had inspired. And in doing so, the course of the galaxy had begun to change forever. The galaxy had changed, though few yet realized it. The Arachneans had been pushed back, not by sheer force, but by the ingenuity, courage, and endurance of humans. Across star systems, whispers spread. Humans had survived the impossible, inspired allies, and turned the tide of a battle that no one expected them to influence. Elia's ward, the human envoy, had become more than a representative. He had become a symbol. Princess Celira walked through the aftermath of the conflict, her mind restless. Ships burned in distant sectors, but survivors were already organizing, rebuilding, and helping one another. Humans moved among them, coordinating repairs, directing supplies, and comforting those who had lost everything. She observed quietly from her transport as Elias moved from station to station, calm, decisive, and tireless. Even now, after days without sleep, he showed no sign of surrender. She had always believed that power was measured by strength, control, and fear. Armies followed commands, rulers ruled by dominance, and the galaxy obeyed only those who could impose it. But humans were proving something she had never considered. Power could also come from endurance, from courage, and from the willingness to place others above oneself. "Your Highness," a Virelian commander said, bowing sharply, "the humans have done what none of our fleets could. They have coordinated across species, inspired courage where we expected despair, and forced the Arachnians to retreat. Their actions, they are extraordinary." Celira nodded, her gaze fixed on Elias as he directed a convoy to deliver supplies to a damaged colony. "Extraordinary is not the word," she said softly. "Humans are different. They do not fear the impossible. They endure, they adapt, and they inspire. That is something we have long overlooked." Elias approached her then, his expression calm, but his eyes reflecting the weight of what had transpired. "The battle is not yet over," he said. "We have survived today, but tomorrow will bring new challenges. Humanity endures not because we are invincible, but because we refuse to give up." The princess studied him, her thoughts heavy. She had ruled for centuries, and yet she felt something new: humility. She realized that she had underestimated not just humans, but the very concept of endurance. Strength was not always in claws or weapons or centuries of dominance. Sometimes it was in persistence, in courage, and in the refusal to surrender. Over the next several days, Elias worked tirelessly alongside the Virelian fleets and their allies. He coordinated rebuilding efforts, repaired communication networks, and created strategies for defense that relied on adaptability rather than force. He taught other species to cooperate, to value each other's strengths, and to trust in ways they had never considered. Even those who had doubted humans began to see their worth. Pilots who had expected to fail under impossible conditions succeeded because Elias had guided them. Scientists who had resigned themselves to disaster discovered new solutions inspired by human ingenuity. Civilians once considered insignificant were protected, cared for, and given hope. Princess Celira watched quietly, learning more than she had in centuries of leadership. She observed how humans did not seek recognition or dominance. They acted not for glory, but for survival for others, and for something deeper, an unyielding belief that life, in all its forms, was worth protecting. One evening, after the fleets had rested and repair teams had finished their work, the princess summoned Elias privately. They stood on a balcony overlooking the stars, silent except for the distant hum of engines and the occasional chatter of crew members. "You have changed the course of this galaxy, human," she said quietly. "Not with power, not with fear, not with force. You have done it with endurance, courage, and cooperation. Your people, they are remarkable." Elias bowed slightly, a gesture of respect rather than submission. "We survive because we must, Your Highness. We endure because giving up is never an option. We do not fight to dominate, but to protect and inspire. That is all we know how to do." She considered his words carefully. For centuries, her empire had measured strength by dominance. Now she realized that she had been blind. Humans had demonstrated that true power could come from something more subtle, more enduring, and far more dangerous than brute force. The galaxy must see this, she said finally. Humanity's endurance, your ingenuity, your courage, they must be recognized. You will not be dismissed as weak any longer. Elias shook his head. I do not seek recognition, Your Highness. Humanity's survival is enough. We do not need praise. We only need the chance to endure, to protect, and to live. Salira studied him in silence. She saw in him not just a representative of a fragile species, but the embodiment of everything she had underestimated: courage, endurance, and the ability to change the course of events without dominance or fear. In the following weeks, the Virelian Empire underwent a quiet transformation. Reports of human action spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring admiration, curiosity, and respect. Other species began to approach humanity differently, not as laborers or diplomats, but as equals. The princess herself began consulting Elias and other humans on strategy, diplomacy, and the management of crises. It was a subtle shift, but profound. The galaxy, long ruled by fear and strength, had glimpsed a new kind of power. One that relied not on dominance, but on endurance, courage, and the willingness to protect others even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Elias continued his work, never seeking glory or recognition. He coordinated fleets, assisted colonies, and mediated disputes, always calmly, always with thoughtfulness. Humans were fragile by design, yet their endurance, adaptability, and courage made them a force that no one could ignore. Princess Salira observed him, and slowly she began to understand something fundamental. Power was not always in weapons, claws, or armies. Sometimes it was in the refusal to give up. Sometimes it was in the courage to act despite fear, to protect others despite weakness, and to endure when the universe expected surrender. One day, after months of rebuilding and reorganization, the princess invited Elias to stand before her once more. This time the court watched in silence. The Virelians had learned to respect him, not as a weak human but as a symbol of endurance and courage. You have shown the galaxy a new kind of strength, she said, one that we have long ignored. You and your people have proven that survival is not measured by dominance but by courage, endurance, and the will to protect others. Humanity will no longer be dismissed as weak. You have changed how we see the universe. Elias bowed, a simple gesture of respect. Your Highness, we only do what we must. We endure because it is our nature. We protect because it is right. We act not for recognition but because giving up is never an option. For the first time in centuries, Princess Salira rose from her throne. She stepped down to meet Elias at eye level, a gesture of equality rather than command. The court watched in stunned silence. A human had not only survived but had changed the perspective of an empire. The princess extended her hand, and Elias accepted it. In that moment, the fragile human and the powerful alien princess stood together, not as ruler and subject, but as equals. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. In the months that followed, the changes spread. Humans were granted recognition as equals in the coalition. Their strategies, endurance, and courage were studied and respected. The Virelian Empire, once rigid and proud, began to embrace cooperation and adaptability, inspired by the human example. Elias, however, remained humble. He did not seek power, wealth, or status. He continued to act as humanity's envoy, always calm, always thoughtful, always enduring. He had shown the galaxy what humans could do, and in doing so, had ensured that his people would never again be underestimated. And Princess Salira, once a ruler who measured strength by fear and dominance, now measured it by courage, endurance, and the ability to protect others. The human who had stood before her had not only survived impossible trials and battles, but had changed her understanding of the universe itself. The galaxy had shifted quietly, irrevocably, and humanity had risen not by conquest, but by refusing to surrender, by enduring, and by inspiring all who witnessed their courage. Elias stood once more on the balcony of the Virelian palace, looking out at the stars. The universe was vast, full of unknown dangers and endless challenges. Yet he smiled faintly, knowing that humans would endure, adapt, and survive. The princess approached him quietly, her presence calm. "You have done more than I imagined, human. You have shown me that strength is not what I believed. Humanity will be remembered, not as the weakest, but as a species that refuses to give up." Elias nodded. "We do not seek to be remembered, Your Highness. We only seek to endure, to protect, and to act when others cannot." "That is what humans do." Celira studied him, a rare smile crossing her features. "Then perhaps the galaxy is in better hands than I realized. The future may be uncertain, but I believe humanity can face it, and so can we all if we learn from you." And so, under the light of distant stars, a human and an alien princess stood together, looking toward a future shaped not by dominance or fear, but by endurance, courage, and the refusal to surrender. A human had stood before an alien princess, and everything had changed. The galaxy would never forget it. The human stood before the alien princess, and everything changed.